Welcome back to my review of Eerie, Indiana. Today's video will be focusing on episode 2, The Retainer. So let's get right into it. This episode originally aired on September 22nd, 1991, and again was directed by Joe Dante. This episode starts with a more regular intro that we'll start to see from now on, with Marshall telling us how weird Eerie really is, and that no one believes him, and that Eerie is the center of weirdness in the entire planet. He goes on to say that a guy that looks like Elvis lives on his paper route, and Bigfoot eats out of his trash, and he mentions the Foreverwhere lady from the previous episode, and now he thinks that man's best friend is up to no good. He tried to tell his family, but they just think he's weird. Better weird than dead. It then cuts to Marshall's parents calling Marshall so they can go to his orthodontist appointment, but Marshall doesn't want to go. His parents tell Marshall that they're concerned about Marshall because he hasn't made any new friends since they moved, and now he's making a big deal about getting a retainer. They ask if there's anything he wants to talk about, and Marshall just brushes them off because he knows they won't believe him. But his real concern is the dogs. We are then introduced to Steve, who is played by Patrick LeBois, who I recognized from the movie Heavyweights. Steve is getting some dental work by his dentist, played by the late Vincent Schiavelli. I recognized him from the movie Ghost. He gives off the mad scientist vibe, and he gives him this experimental retainer that looks like something Dr. Frankenstein made. Steve unknowingly starts to hear dogs through his retainer, but shrugs it off. But Steve forgets, this is Eerie, Indiana. Marshall says that Steve wasn't really a friend, but would come to Marshall's house to eat because his mom wouldn't let him eat snacks at home. Marshall and Simon are looking at some books about the Bermuda Triangle in Eerie, when Steve says that it's all phony, that nothing has ever happened to him. Marshall and Simon show him pics of UFOs, but Steve doesn't believe them. Steve then starts to hear voices through his retainer and thinks it's Simon wanting some of his hoagie. Simon says that it wasn't him or Marshall. Steve then says he's been hearing voices all day. Just then, they see a dog staring at them. Steve is hearing every thought the dog is thinking. Steve says it started when he got his new retainer. Marshall then thinks he could hear the dog's thoughts. They decide to do some tests to see if he's right. They put a grocery bag over Steve's head to see if he can hear the dog's thoughts. Marshall thinks that all the metal in Steve's mouth might be the reason why he's picking up the dog's thoughts. They do the experiment and Steve is able to hear the dog's thoughts without looking, proving Marshall is right. The dog then starts playing with Simon, but Steve is able to hear what the dog is really thinking, and it's to eat Simon. Just then, a French poodle shows up and tells the dog to leave because there is work to be done. The dog then leaves. Marshall and Simon make Steve into an antenna so they can hear what Steve is hearing. Then they try to go find some dogs and find some. They hear a group of dogs singing through Steve's retainer.
Dog bones, it's easy to eat them bones. The neck bone's connected to the chin bone. The chin bone's connected to the nose bone.
Marshall then hears some chanting from the dog pound. He hears freedom, freedom. They head over to the pound and look through the window. They see Old Man Tithers, the dog catcher, who was played by Lou Cattell, who I remember from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, playing the Amazing Larry, and from Seinfeld. Marshall and Steve don't seem to get any voices, but Simon thinks it's strange that there's no barking at the pound. They think everything is okay and leave the pound. Mr. Tithers is sweeping the floor when the dogs start barking at him. He threatens them with the chamber. Just then, a stray dog leaps at the dog catcher from out of nowhere. Later that night, Marshall and Simon are doing homework when Steve enters through the window. Steve is shaken up, saying he's been hearing voices, that something's going down at the dog pound. Marshall and Simon go on night patrol and head over to the pound. Simon notices the door being propped open by a human bone. They think it might be Mr. Tithers. They enter the pound and are greeted by barking dogs. Then Steve starts to hear what the dogs are really saying. Bite the hand that feeds us. They soon run into the French poodle and the other dog from the first encounter at Marshall's house. Marshall asks what they want, and the dogs tell them their demands. Then a dog runs towards the chamber and destroys it. The French poodle then says that a dog revolution is coming, and if they want to live, they better open the dogs' doors. Marshall and Simon release the dogs, and then the dogs say they want Steve's retainer. Steve doesn't want to, but Marshall and Simon tell him he has to. Steve has trouble taking the retainer off while the dogs chant Metal Mouth. Steve then takes off and the dogs run after him. Marshall then says that was the last time they saw Steve. Very cryptic. It then cuts to Marshall getting his retainer done by a less mad scientist dentist. Marshall seems okay with it. They arrive home and Marshall shows his family his retainer. As Marshall begins his paper route, he sees the dog just sitting there. Marshall then tells the dog that he has to finish his paper route and assures the dog his retainer is just a regular one. He can't hear a thing. As Marshall hops on his bike, the dog jumps on Marshall and on the dog was Steve's retainer. Simon and Marshall add Steve's retainer to their evidence locker. Someday, maybe the world will be ready for the truth. And that concludes episode 2 of Eerie, Indiana. Another great episode. The story and the idea was a good concept to me. The acting was great, and I liked how Steve's character would be over-exaggerated. And of course, the dogs were awesome. Let me know what you guys think of this episode. Do you guys remember this one? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.